You are the topic of the day, Richard. First of all, it's great to see you again. And you're down very broadly under the umbrella category of what is an AI native law firm and a new mod. And so
Yeah.
welcome, and please go ahead and take the floor.
All right. Fantastic. Yeah, I've got a few points, and then if you want to ask questions, go for it. Can you hear me okay, by the way,
Yep,
first?
loud and clear.
All right. Awesome.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry, maybe you can introduce yourself in artificial lawyer as well.
yeah, sure. If people don't know me, my name is Richard Tromans. I'm based in London. I've been working in the sector for about a decade now. In 2016, I started a magazine called Artificial Lawyer, which some of you may have read. Um, Huge proponent of and supporter of AI native law firms, AI first law firms. In fact, that's a great segue, really, because I got into this because I was very interested in the business of law and I saw an AI tool. It was made by Raven back in 2016 and it blew my mind. And having studied how law firms worked and the business of law and the economics of the pyramid, it became incredibly obvious, even back then, 10 years ago, that if AI took off, it would completely change everything. It would transform the business model and therefore a whole bunch of things across the sector. So fundamentally, I'm just going to talk a bit about how I think about AI native law firms and then a little bit about the business of law around them. So, I mean, the first key point is back in 2016, I was perhaps naive. I thought that when the technology reached a maturity that was undeniable and its capability was undeniable, that big law would very rapidly fall in line and change rapidly. Instead, what we've seen is a lot of the large law firms have adopted the technology, but their business model remains pretty much exactly as it was 20 years ago. And I think the reason for that, as I think probably everyone in this room knows, is that they're structurally locked. They can't really change. And so the reason why the AI first, the new mods, as I call them, have come into existence is simply because Big Law has given them a room. They've allowed Crosby and Soxton and General Legal and Covenant and a whole bunch of other ones to come into existence. So what actually are they, and why do I call them new mods, as in new models? It's basically because of this, is that I think eventually even the large law firms, which are sort of dabbling with AI without really committing, significantly to it, we're going to get to a point in a couple of years where even fairly conservative law firms will be using AI for the first draft of documents or the first run through, contract review and so forth. So everybody to some degree is going to become a little bit AI first. And if that is the case, then we're going to have to come up with a new definition. So I've kind of jumped the gun and I'm just calling them new mods, as in new model, which refers to a new business model. So how do we define these things? Well, the first thing is the pyramid, right? So if you think about that Sequoia paper that was written a couple of weeks ago, a very good analysis talking about, and other people have, who've made similar analyses, basically breaking the pyramid of knowledge labor into two sections. So you've got the intelligence bit, effectively what the associates do. So complex work, not easy work by any means, but work that can be modeled, work that can be mapped, work where the workflows and the data can be crystallized and used again. And if it can be repeated, we can automate it, right? We can create agents, we can create workflows with agents and so forth. This is why all of this does connect back to the original topic, the core topic here, which is agents. Because if we're going to apply agents to the law at scale in this $1 trillion global industry, and that doesn't even include the unmet needs yet, then we're going to have to think about the business of law aspects as well. So you've got your pyramid, three quarters of it, say, are the intelligence layer, and then the top bit is the judgment layer, right? The hard to define, hard to define. It's a philosophical question, but fundamentally, you might say when you see judgment, you know what it is, right? The new mods fundamentally are trying to get all of the fee earners, all of the lawyers, the experienced lawyers in that business to focus on the judgment bit. And they're trying to put as much of the intelligence layer into the AI, the agents and so forth. They're trying to believe the automation part. And that really is the fundamental difference. I mean, people say to me, so what's the difference? So what? My law firm uses AI. What's the big difference? There is a fundamental difference is that they're saying, well, we are not trying to use humans as leverage. We're not trying to use associates as leverage. The leverage is the AI. That is the fundamental point. I mean, if you wanted to write a sort of 10 commandments of AI native law firms, commandment number one is the leverage is the AI, not a room full of associates. Second point is fixed fees. Once you start denominating value with time, then you can move to a fixed fee or a flat fee or some other type of fee. A fixed fee or a flat fee makes the most sense because if you think about it, if you look at most economics, everything generally operates off a fixed fee, right? There's very, very, very few things in life where you actually have a time-based fee. It's extremely unusual at this point in history for things to have a time-based price. Um, and of course, it's not that law firms were deliberately creating this system to exploit it. It kind of came into being in the 80s. I mean, you probably know the history. It was created originally as an access to justice idea many, many, many years ago. But once it was applied to business law firms, commercial law firms with large leverage models, it became incredibly profitable. And then they just started to, there is a degree of deliberate exploitation of that model. And now they've got so used to it that we have, as a sort of legal culture, we just live within it, and we seem to think that it's normal somehow, when actually it's only existed for a few decades. And if something's only existed for a few decades, well, then it can certainly cease to exist again in a couple of decades, or perhaps sooner. So that is another key point. So the pyramid, the focus on the judgment, or trying to move to the judgment, automate the intelligence, move on to a fixed fee or a flat fee, let go of the time. And the additional point on the time is that one of the things you'll see in a lot of the advertising and marketing around some of these new model law firms is, hey, we can get this done in 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. And I think that's great. Obviously, as a client, you want to get stuff done more rapidly. And if all of that intelligence, like all of that process work, is being automated, you will get through faster, even with the human on the top doing the judgment work. But I don't think that actually is the real prize. It's a side effect. I think, again, going back to the earlier point, I think we've been so conditioned to think that value equals time because we've grown up in this legal culture where the more hours something is, the more valuable it is. We've almost been sort of brainwashed to think that if we do something quickly, that somehow that's like some sort of magical bonus. I think really to see the ability of technology to produce something quickly in the legal dimension, I think just to see that as an extra bonus. I don't think that should be the end goal. The end goal is not to go as fast as possible. The end goal is to create value and hopefully in a very economical and in an efficient way. If it comes out faster, that's great. But because we're doing it on a fixed fee, I don't think it really matters that much. Next point is, yeah, and this is a question rather than a definition. And this is if you look at a lot of the new model law firms, so you've got people who are doing stuff like private equity, like Norm and Covenant, and then you've got others working with startups like Soxton. You've got others doing MSAs and NDAs like Crosby and General Legal. There's a whole bunch of them. But the reality is a lot of them are focused more on the, process level work, that intelligence level work. And what would be absolutely incredible would be if we can really genuinely start to move up en masse and really get into more and more complex work, which then leads to the next point, which is, this is my theory, is that over the next decade, the new mods will become more like law firms, and the law firms will become more like new mods. This is because if the new mods are going to grow and get more and more funding and take on more and more work and spread horizontally, eventually it's going to make sense for them to go vertically up into more and more complex work. Meanwhile, let's say in five, I don't know how, you can take a guess, everyone in the room. When will the big law firms finally actually have to start changing their model? At that point, once they do, it's going to get kind of weird because you're going to have these new mods who've got this separate entity attached to them that's getting VC investments, and who knows, maybe that some will do IPOs in the next, 5, 6 years, and then the law firms who are steadily seeing more of their work sucked into this AI native side? And at what point do the big law firms then go, hold on a minute, we're cooked, we need to move over? It's going to be fascinating, but for me, it definitely all boils down to the business of law. And the AI bit is like half of it. The AI will drive this change, but the end result will be fundamentally wrapped around the business of law. And that's basically my key point.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. And
my name is Helen, and I'm a typical California lawyer without any tech background. So today I'm going to show you my 100-day personal experiment about OpenClaw. So in past 40 days, I've been building my own AI native law firm with 2 AI agents on OpenClaw, and I call it OpenClaw Law LLP. It's not a real law firm, it's just my personal experiment. And I'm keeping posting it in my LinkedIn publicly. It has gotten quite a lot of traction across US and China. So let me introduce my team to you. So I have 2 AI agents here. So the first one is my senior associate. She's Morgan. So her work is to monitor my inbox and check the emails, breaks complex issues into smaller tasks, and assign them to Clio. And it can also spin up some sub-agents on her own to get work done. And I give her a kind of personality, so she can think like a business advisor. And the other one, I call it Cleo. So Cleo is my first-year associate. She can help me do the legal research, dig into case law, and draft the first version of every memo, basically all the groundwork. And she's eager, thorough, and not afraid to push back on Morgan when she thinks Morgan is wrong. And I'm the supervising attorney, so we 3 are working together in the group chat on Discord. So I'm going to show you a live demo I recorded with Dazza a few days ago. I sped it up so you can see the full workflow in 2 minutes. The first step, Morgan needs my code to access my inbox. She found that there were 18 recent emails, and 1 email was from my client. My client asking something about how to set up an AI native law firm, and also request a call with me tomorrow morning. I asked Morgan to confirm with client about the call and get work done as soon as possible. And Cleo began to work. Finally, we can see the email has been sent already. Yeah, usually Morgan will review Cleo's work and challenge her, but for time saving, I just skip that part. So now we receive the full memo delivered by Cleo with multi-state analysis and an overall recommendation, which is pretty good. Yeah, so now I use a customer skill called argument report to track Morgan's disagreement with Cleo. And then I use the brief, that is another custom skill, to develop skills, improve efficiency and security based on each session I work with my agents. Now we get to the final step. I asked Morgan to set up the call with client tomorrow morning. And the meeting has been set up. It's done. Thank you. So what you just saw is about 2 different kinds of workflow. The first part is about, I would say, a traditional lawyer would work. Read the email, assign legal research, deliver a full legal memo, and reply to client. But you can also see there's a new layer about the workflow. The workflow will only happen with agents. For example, the discussion, the argument report, the customer skill, right? And the debrief skill, I built it by myself. So with these two skills, I can have what I call it as a self-learning data layer in my AI native law firm. So there are some stories which I found very interesting but cannot be included in my demo. So I will tell you two stories. The first story is about sub-agents. So basically, you can ask your agent to spawn more sub-agents to help you to do some separate works at the same time in parallel. And you can see now, so Clio hit a tool limitation. So instead of stopping, she proposed spawning a sub-agent. I didn't configure that, so she found it on her own. And I realized there is a big potential of this. Why? Because legal work is about breaking complex issues into smaller pieces. And a sub-agent can do that in parallel. So you can receive like, for example, let me take an example. I just gave a legal research something about how to, if I want to know the regulatory landscape about Bitcoin across US, China, Australia, UK, whatever, and I ask Morgan to do it. Then Morgan can spin up like dozens of agents. Each sub-agent can do the research for each jurisdiction. So you can improve the efficiency hugely. And also I can see the risk behind this. So if agents spawn agents and sub-agents spawn more sub-agents, so where does it stop? That's why I added hard rules. First, about the necessity. So if there's no necessary situation, you cannot spawn sub-agents. And the second, about the quantity cap. No more than 3 agents, no more than 3 sub-agents one time. And the third, no sub-agents, never. So that was the first story I want to share with you. And here is the second one, about the agent-to-agent challenge. So I use the same question just as I shown in my demo. How should an AI native law firm be set up? I tested this question with my 2 agents. What happened? So first, Morgan proposed a document preparation company as a result, as one of her proposal about the structure. But Clio pushed it back. Why? Because when I traced it back, I found that the real answer is generally debatable, even for lawyers. So you can see when you have 2 agents debate each other, you may find the blind spots AI may have. And why it matters? In law, reasoning matters more than conclusion. So first, you can see the errors visible. And second, debate can build better outcomes. For example, if you are a litigator, you can stress test your arguments. If you are a transaction lawyer, you can stress test your clause. And you can also find common ground between legal and business solutions. So that's pretty much about the 2 stories. If you are interested in my story, you can follow me in my personal website and my LinkedIn about the full story. I also want to elaborate more about the theory behind this experiment. It's my 5-step AI native law firm roadmap. So the first step is to use raw AI. I think it's a table stakes now. And step 2 is redesign your workflow with agents. For example, you can use your agents to spawn more sub-agents to help you. And also you can use agent-to-agent challenge to reduce the hallucinations of your AI output. And the step 3 is the self-learning data layer. For example, my skill about the debrief can help me to develop more skills and to improve the efficiency based on each session I work with my agents. And as a step 4, AI as infra. So you can use AI as a HR, as a tax experts, marketing experts in your law firm. And naturally, you will get to the final step. You will have the hybrid model, your AI native law firm. So that's basically the idea behind this experiment. And I want to test the step by step with my 2 AI agents. Yeah, that's pretty much about my stories with my agents. Thank you for listening.
That's great. Round of applause for Helen, I think, huh? So it turns out there's 1,000 roads to Rome as we all try to figure out together what is an AI native law firm, and how do we, first of all, just what is it, and how do we get there? So that was one excellent example. And I'll just say, on a personal note, coming out of MIT for so many years, framing something like this as a 100-day experiment is its own reward, I'd say, and it's just great in so many levels. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think the person who's best known globally at this point for the notion of an AI native law firm, a Claude-Native Law Firm in this case, is Zack Shapiro, who has another way to also do very open innovation by basically sharing what he did and how he did it, really transparently in a blog post and through Twitter. And Scott, you'll have to tell us how many views it has now. It was like moving toward 8 million last time I checked. But Zack, I'm just so thrilled that you're able to join us here at Stanford Law School today to share your experience on what a Claude-Native law firm is and how it's going so far, and your willingness to take some questions. So Zack, welcome, and the show is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'll try and sort of move through some of this as quickly as I can and share my perspective. But I guess the thing I'd like to start with is just share what I think are some of the principles of how I came to do a Claude-Native law firm, and what I see as sort of the easy, non-technical path for lawyers to do some of what I'm doing. The first is just not to be afraid to use AI. I mean, probably people who are at this event are past that step, but it's worth noting that the legal profession really has always had a blind spot for technology. And I think with generative AI in particular, so much of the coverage we get is about lawyers submitting briefs with hallucinated cases in them. It's questions about confidentiality and privilege, and a lot of those are legitimate questions, but that is so the smallest part of this conversation, and really missing the bigger picture of what AI has to offer, and the impact that it's going to have, like it or not, on the profession of law, as so many other white collar professions. So I really think lawyers should not be afraid to use AI. If anything, you should be afraid not to use AI. And then the second principle I'd say is use AI for all sorts of things. I am not a huge fan of many of the sort of legal AI vertical products out there, because I feel like they silo AI usage into specific buckets, and they say, all right, here are things you can do with generative AI. Whereas this is a technology that is so new, especially the agentic version of AI that's really only been broadly available since the beginning of this year, that you're going to miss a lot of the innovation if your interaction with this technology is through a dashboard, which is giving you a list of things you can do. And so I think, just experiment with AI in your work. I would use it for the easy things and see what you can automate. Say, more importantly, use AI for the hard things and see where it can be a thought partner, how it can tackle difficult projects, where it breaks and where it does poorly. And then when you wrestle with it, where you can get it to be better at the difficult tasks over time, and how to iterate, and really see how it works within your personal workflow. I think for that reason, working with the bare metal is incredibly important. There are some legal AI tools that are better than others. Some I think have different use cases, but I think every lawyer who wants to see what the future of the practice of law is going to look like is better served by using just the generative AI models themselves, things like ChatGPT and Claude and Codex and Claude Cowork, and look at different skills that are available, create your own skills. But the technology is most powerful when it can watch you work and when it can build for you, as opposed to building for what some engineer's idea of what the legal profession looks like. I think the two skills of the future for lawyers that want to be Claude or AI native are prompting and then building skills. Prompting, I think the good news is it does not require any technical skill at all. I'm not someone who has technical skill. It just requires you to be detailed and specific about the work output that you want. I think lawyers who have experience and judgment are going to have an advantage here, because they can more easily imagine and describe what it is they want the AI to do. I think everyone should probably be writing longer prompts than comes naturally to us. A 1 to 3 sentence prompt, which I think is sort of the average AI user, is not going to yield the same results as a couple thousand word prompt, which I think is necessary for the most difficult tasks, or if you don't like typing, just speaking into the sort of microphone in your phone for minutes at a time and sort of free associating about what it is you're looking for. But I think prompting as a skill is hugely important and a big part of what lawyering in the future will look like. And then building skills, separate from prompts, which are really about making sure the AI knows what output you want and making sure it has all of the context that it needs for the particular task you are asking it to do. Skills are much more about standard operating procedures or protocols of the steps that you'd like the AI to take in getting something done. The way that I created my first set of skills as a highly non-technical person was just to point Claude at all of the conversations I had had with it. I fed it the 33-page PDF from Anthropic about how to create custom skills. I said, please read this. Please look at all of my conversations with you from the beginning of time, especially looking at where you succeeded in tasks and where you failed in other tasks, and then pitch me on the 5 skills that you think will make my life better. It did a great job out of the gate. And I think this really speaks to the idea of letting AI do the heavy lifting here in terms of making itself useful and in terms of building workflows around the way that you as an individual attorney specifically work, as opposed to skills built at the product level and then having to change your own workflow to deal with AI. And then I think the other part of skills is learning how to use your workplace as a reinforcement learning environment for those skills. So skills that, especially if you give Claude data by prompting it heavily for a while, it'll have a decent set of skills it can build for you on that basis. But where skills really become powerful is when you use them consistently, when things go unexpectedly well, when you stop Claude and you say, listen, this went unexpectedly well. I'd like this result to happen more often. Please update the skill to make sure that that happens. And when something goes poorly, to stop Claude and say, hey, this didn't work out. Let's think about how to update the skill to make sure this happens less often. And if you do that consistently enough, the usefulness of these skills will compound over time. I think where this leads in terms of sort of in the macro with the profession is there are going to be some people who get really good at this and really powerful at telling the AI what they want and getting good results out of that. I think that is people who are both really good lawyers already and people who are just very clear in being able to sort of speak instructions. I think that will lead to the rise of 10x lawyers, like we've seen 10x engineers and technical professions for decades now. It'll fundamentally change the way that law firms work, away from sort of the leverage model where you have armies of junior associates that are sort of the economic engine of the firm rolling up to a senior partner who's actually exercising the judgment that clients are paying for that gets filtered through many humans. I think it'll become a leaner structure. And so that will probably lead to some amount of reorganization. But the upside of this is what we're really getting rid of here is sort of the drudgery and execution layer. And we are distilling the thing that most of us went to law school for, or if you're at Stanford, you are currently in law school for, which is to advise clients to come up with strategies and to be a zealous advocate for whatever part of the market you're here to serve. And so I see that as fundamentally good news. I think now is a really interesting time to be in law school. There's definitely going to be disruption, but I think on the other side of that disruption, I'm very optimistic about what the profession will look like. So I just want to pause here for questions. I know our time is short.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zack. And before we let you go, there was one other question from Parth that I want to just squeeze in. What's your take on ownership of skills? And so skills represent so much of the underlying knowledge and expertise of the individual that did it, but also in a sense of the firm when you're there in the capacity of as like an employee, for example, if that's the context. How does that net out? What can you take with you when you go to another firm or off in your career, and what do you have to leave behind? Who owns what?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it depends on the partnership agreement at the firm. I've talked to a lot of law firms recently about what will it mean for everyone to be AI native, and one of the real concerns that law firms have is how are we going to hold on to partners with their own book of business when it's so easy to spin up your own shop? And what I thought about, so my wife works in finance, she works a big hedge fund, and she has to build models of all the companies that she covers, that she invests in. And that's a pretty big barrier to her switching funds, having to rebuild all those models. Not that she can't do it, it's just really hard. I feel the same way at this point about my skills. Could I recreate them from scratch? Yes, I'm sure I could. but I would really, really rather not. And it's a big part of my edge right now. I put hundreds of hours into the most used skills, just refining them to the point where I can get, the results out of my contract review skill I was describing. And so I think, it'll be a really interesting question. Do partnership agreements include ownership of skills? I think they should if they're a firm, but this is going to be an important point of negotiation between law firms as businesses and then the lawyers who work there in the future.
Here, here. Good counsel from Zack Shapiro. And thank you so much for taking time out of, I know you're an intensely busy day, and for sharing with us a glimpse of the future, the shape of things to come for what an AI native law firm is going to look like. So thanks again, and just keep innovating. Thank you, Zack.
Thank you for having me.
Great.